The scorching sun beat down on Redemption Gulch, a town seemingly forgotten by mercy, a place where dust and despair clung to every soul like a second skin. Here, Bartholomew Bart Higgins reigned supreme, his wealth a fortress built on intimidation and his arrogance a shadow that chilled the hearts of lesser men. His son, Bartholomew Jr., a pale imitation of his father's cruelty, trailed in his wake, his laughter as hollow and sharp as shattered glass. They were the arbiters of fortune and misfortune, and today, they had chosen cruelty as their sport. The object of their twisted amusement was Jedediah, a quiet cowboy who moved through life with the silence of the prairie wind, his hands calloused from honest work, his eyes holding a depth few cared to explore. He was a man of few words, perceived as simple, a perfect target for the Higginses' particular brand of venom. And then there was Elara. She had arrived in Redemption Gulch under a cloud of tragedy, her vibrant spirit now encased in a body paralyzed from the waist down, a cruel twist of fate that had left her vulnerable in a town that preyed on weakness. Today, in the dusty, jeering town square, Bart Higgins, his voice dripping with mock benevolence, orchestrated his vile spectacle. "Jedediah, my boy!" Higgins boomed, his voice echoing off the dilapidated storefronts, drawing a crowd of curious and cruel onlookers. "We've noticed your lonely state. A man needs a companion. And we, in our generosity, have found you one." He gestured dramatically towards a roughly constructed cart where Elara sat, her dark skin a stark contrast to the drab surroundings, her eyes holding a universe of unspoken sorrow yet gleaming with an unyielding, quiet dignity. She was bound loosely, a prop in their malicious play. A bride for the brave cowboy. A bit stationary, perhaps, Higgins sneered, eliciting a wave of coarse laughter from his sycophants, but a bride nonetheless. Sold to Jedediah for the price of this town's entertainment. The air crackled with malice. Elara did not flinch, her gaze fixed somewhere beyond the jeering faces, a silent testament to an unbroken will. Jedediah stepped forward, his expression unreadable. The crowd tensed, expecting him to flee, to protest, to break. Instead, he met Higgins' gaze, a flicker of something unidentifiable in his own. He walked towards Elara, his worn boots kicking up small puffs of dust. He knelt before her, not with pity, but with a strange, profound respect. "I accept," Jedediah said, his voice quiet but firm, cutting through the mocking silence. He gently untied the ropes that held her, his touch surprisingly tender. The crowd gasped, then erupted into renewed, scornful laughter. Higgins roared, slapping his thigh. "The fool actually took her. This is richer than I imagined." Bart Jr. chimed in, "What's he gonna do with damaged goods, Pa?" They thought they had orchestrated the ultimate humiliation, a crushing blow to two souls they deemed beneath them. They saw a simpleton cowboy and a broken woman. They were blind to the steel in Jedediah's spine, blind to the fire that smoldered in Elara's eyes. The narrator's voice, laden with foreboding, might have whispered to the wind, they sold him a paralyzed black bride as a cruel joke, but the cowboy raised her higher than anyone else. What happened next in the dust-choked town of Redemption Gulch would echo through the canyons of justice forever. If you find yourself drawn to tales where the underestimated rise and the arrogant fall, stay with us, for this story is just beginning to unfold its wings of righteous retribution. Jedediah carefully lifted Elara into his strong arms, her slight weight no burden to him. He turned his back on the jeering crowd, on the triumphant sneers of the Higginses, and carried her away towards his humble cabin on the outskirts of town, a place where decency still drew breath. The cruel laughter followed them, but it sounded strangely hollow against the vast, indifferent sky. They could not know that the seeds of their own destruction had just been gleefully sown. The days that followed were a torment of whispers and pointed stares for Jedediah and Elara. Bartholomew Higgins Sr., emboldened by what he perceived as Jedediah's utter spinelessness, decided to escalate his cruel amusement. His ego, a monstrous, insatiable beast, demanded a grander stage for his mockery. A wedding feast, he declared to his sniveling son and their coterie of fawning associates, his voice booming with self-importance. "We shall host a grand celebration for our dear Jedediah and his acquisition. Let the entire county bear witness to his folly, and to my magnanimity in providing such entertainment." Invitations, penned with flourishes of condescending wit, were dispatched across the territory, promising an event of unparalleled spectacle. The true intent, of course, was to parade Jedediah's shame and Ilara's tragic state before a wider audience, cementing Higgins' dominance through public humiliation. Bart Jr., ever eager to please his father and exercise his own petty cruelties, took charge of the preparations, ensuring every detail was designed to inflict maximum discomfort and embarrassment. He envisioned a grotesque parody of a wedding, a circus of scorn. Inside their small, surprisingly clean cabin, Jedediah worked with quiet diligence. He had, with remarkable ingenuity, adapted the modest space for Ilara. A smooth ramp replaced the steps, shelves were lowered for her reach, and a comfortable, padded chair became her throne by the window, from which she could observe the comings and goings of the unforgiving land. He spoke to her not in platitudes or pity, but as an equal, sharing his thoughts, asking her opinions, which she conveyed through meticulous, handwritten notes on a slate he provided, her handwriting surprisingly elegant, her observations unnervingly astute. He treated her with a reverence that defied the town's contempt, a gentle care that was a balm to her wounded spirit. He saw not a broken vessel, but a keen intellect trapped, a spirit that refused to be extinguished. "They think they are clever, Mr. Higgins and his son," she wrote one evening, her eyes reflecting the lamplight with a knowing gleam. "They see only what they wish to see." Jedediah nodded, a rare smile touching his lips. "Their pride, Ilara, will be the architect of their downfall. They are building their own gallows and inviting the world to watch." Meanwhile, Higgins pontificated in the town saloon, his voice a torrent of arrogance. "That half-wit Jedediah needs to learn his place. And this creature he's saddled himself with will serve as a permanent reminder. I am teaching this town a valuable lesson about the natural order of things." His sycophants lapped up his words, their laughter echoing his own, blind to the storm gathering on the horizon. They were so engrossed in their vision of Jedediah's humiliation that they failed to notice the subtle shift in the air, the quiet resolve hardening in Jedediah's gaze, the intense focus in Ilara's as she painstakingly filled page after page of her journal with observations, calculations, and connections that no one suspected she was capable of making. The date of the feast approached, pregnant with the promise of either ultimate disgrace or an astonishing reversal, a secret held tight in the shared silence of two souls who had found an unlikely alliance in the face of overwhelming cruelty. Jedediah wasn't just tending to Ilara, he was preparing, silently, methodically, for a reckoning. The day of the wedding feast dawned with a deceptive calm, the sun casting long, ominous shadows across Redemption Gulch. The Higgins ranch buzzed with activity, a perverse carnival atmosphere taking hold. Tables groaned under the weight of food, musicians tuned their instruments for a mocking serenade, and guests, a mix of the genuinely cruel and the morbidly curious, arrived in droves, eager for the spectacle. Bartholomew Higgins Sr. stood at the entrance to his sprawling veranda, resplendent in his finest attire, his chest puffed with insufferable pride. Bart Jr., smirking, stood beside him, ready to unleash a fresh volley of insults. Then, a hush fell over the assembly. Jedediah arrived, not in a rickety cart, but driving a well-maintained buckboard. Beside him sat Ilara, dressed in a simple but elegant gown of deep indigo that Jedediah had somehow procured. Her hair was neatly styled, and though her body was still, her eyes were luminous, radiating an almost unnerving calm. She held a small, leather-bound portfolio on her lap. Higgins, momentarily surprised by their dignified appearance, quickly recovered his sneer. "Ah, the happy couple," he boomed, his voice laced with venom. "Come, Jedediah, don't be shy. And your lovely bride. We have prepared a place of honor for you both." He gestured to two conspicuously low, uncomfortable stools placed directly in front of his own grand chair. Bart Jr. snickered, "Wouldn't want her to fall any further, eh, Jed?" This was the moment they had all been waiting for. The humiliation was about to reach its zenith. But as Jedediah helped Ilara from the buckboard, carefully settling her into the wheelchair he had also improved, his demeanor underwent a stunning transformation. He straightened to his full height, and the quiet, unassuming cowboy seemed to vanish, replaced by a man of formidable presence. His voice, when he spoke, was no longer hesitant but clear, resonant, and edged with cold steel. Mr. Higgins, Jedediah began, his gaze sweeping over the astonished crowd, we thank you for this gathering. You have indeed provided a spectacle. But perhaps not the one you intended. Higgins blinked, a flicker of unease finally piercing his arrogance. What is the meaning of this insolence, boy? Jedediah ignored him, turning slightly to address the assembled guests. For too long, this town, this county, has labored under the tyranny of one man's greed and cruelty. Today, that reign ends. A gasp rippled through the crowd. My name, Jedediah continued, his voice ringing with authority, is Jedediah Thorne. And contrary to local belief, I am not a destitute drifter. My family, the Thornes of the Montana Territory, hold extensive ranching and banking interests. Interests that, as it happens, include a significant portion of Mr. Bartholomew Higgins' outstanding debts and mortgages. The color drained from Higgins' face. Bart Jr. looked utterly bewildered. Jedediah then gestured to Ilara. And this remarkable woman, Ilara, whom you so callously sought to demean, is not merely a victim. Before a tragic accident, orchestrated by malice and designed to silence her, Ilara Vance was one of the most brilliant investigative auditors in the entire territory, known for her uncanny ability to unravel complex financial frauds. He carefully placed a sleek, metallic device near Ilara's hand, a custom-built communication aid. She has been observing. She has been remembering. And she has been meticulously documenting. Ilara's fingers moved deftly across the device. A clear, synthesized voice, dignified and precise, filled the stunned silence. Mr. Higgins, your empire is built on a foundation of lies, theft, and intimidation. And today, we present the ledger. The portfolio on her lap was opened, revealing not just notes, but copies of documents, ledgers, and affidavits. The air crackled, not with mockery, but with the electrifying charge of impending justice. The synthesized voice, imbued with Ilara Vance's keen intellect and unshakable resolve, began to lay bare the rotten core of Bartholomew Higgins' empire. One by one, accusations were leveled, each supported by irrefutable evidence that Jedediah Thorne presented from the portfolio she had so carefully compiled. Firstly, Ilara's voice declared, the matter of the Clearwater Creek water rights. Forged signatures, Mr. Higgins, on deeds belonging to homesteaders driven off their land by your hired thugs. We have sworn affidavits from 2 of those families, now residing in poverty in the next county, and the original deed documents you believed destroyed. Jedediah unfurled a damning piece of parchment, its authenticity immediately apparent, its implications devastating. A low murmur swept through the crowd. Many present had heard whispers of Higgins' ruthlessness concerning water, the lifeblood of the arid land. Higgins sputtered, his face turning a blotchy purple. Lies. All lies? This is preposterous. Thorne, you vagrant, and this talking doll, you dare accuse me. Ilara's voice continued, calm and relentless, cutting through his bluster. Secondly, the systematic underpayment and exploitation of your ranch hands and seasonal workers. We have detailed ledgers, cross-referenced with testimonies, showing decades of skimmed wages, illegal deductions for substandard provisions, and brutal suppression of any who dared to complain. Many of those men are present today, Mr. Higgins. Perhaps they would care to corroborate. Jedediah's gaze swept pointedly over some of the rougher-looking men at the edge of the crowd, men who had long suffered in silence. A few hardened faces nodded grimly, a silent affirmation that sent a fresh wave of shock through the more genteel attendees. Bart Jr., who had always fancied himself a cunning enforcer of his father's will, began to tremble, his eyes darting towards the exits. The evidence mounted, relentless and overwhelming. There were details of cattle rustling schemes, where Higgins' brand was mysteriously found on herds belonging to smaller, struggling ranchers who were then forced to sell their land to him for a pittance. There were records of bribes paid to territorial officials, ensuring his misdeeds went uninvestigated. Ilara's synthesized voice meticulously detailed dates, names, and amounts, painting a portrait of a man consumed by avarice, a predator who had fed on the vulnerable for years. The sycophants who had eagerly anticipated Jedediah's humiliation now stood frozen, their faces pale with dawning horror and the uncomfortable realization of their own complicity in celebrating such a man. The festive decorations of the wedding feast now seemed grotesque, a garish backdrop to a spectacular public dissection. As the final piece of evidence was presented, a carefully documented trail of funds linking Higgins to a shadowy figure known for arranging accidents, a trail that chillingly pointed towards the very incident that had confined Elara to her chair. A collective gasp of revulsion went through the crowd. Though direct proof of his involvement in her specific paralysis was still being sought, the pattern of his ruthlessness was undeniable. Bartholomew Higgins finally broke. His arrogant facade shattered, revealing the desperate, cornered rat beneath. "This is an outrage! A conspiracy," he shrieked, his voice cracking. "Sheriff! Arrest these charlatans! Arrest them!" But the sheriff, a man long in Higgins' pocket, looked uncertain, his eyes wide as he assessed the irrefutable proof and the mood of the crowd, which had turned from amusement to cold fury. Jedediah Thorne stepped forward, his expression resolute. "The time for your brand of justice is over, Higgins. There is a new law in Redemption Gulch today. The law of truth." The downfall of Bartholomew Higgins was as swift as it was spectacular. The sheer weight of the evidence, presented so publicly and methodically by Jedediah Thorne and Elara Vance, left no room for doubt or denial. The sheriff, seeing the tide irrevocably turned and fearing for his own compromised position, reluctantly conceded to the undeniable. "Mr. Thorne," he mumbled, avoiding Higgins' furious glare, "if these documents are as you say, then I have no choice." Jedediah, however, had anticipated this. "Sheriff, your cooperation is noted. However, to ensure impartiality, I have taken the liberty of telegraphing the Territorial Marshal's office. They are already en route with federal warrants based on a portion of this evidence we dispatched earlier." As if on cue, the distant sound of approaching horses grew louder, and soon, a posse of grim-faced marshals, led by a stoic, iron-jawed captain, rode onto the Higgins ranch. The festive atmosphere had completely evaporated, replaced by a stunned, heavy silence, broken only by Higgins' incoherent sputtering and Bart Jr.'s pathetic whimpers. The marshals, briefed and efficient, moved to secure Higgins and his son. The satisfying click of handcuffs snapping onto Bartholomew Higgins' wrists echoed like a death knell for his reign of terror. His face, once a mask of arrogant disdain, was now a canvas of disbelief, rage, and dawning terror. He looked at Jedediah, at Elara, with eyes full of venomous hatred, but his power was gone, his threats empty. "You will pay for this, Thorne. Both of you," he snarled, even as he was led away, a broken, defeated man. Bart Jr. collapsed into a weeping mess, offering no resistance. The sycophants, those who had laughed loudest at Jedediah and Elara, melted away into the crowd, their faces etched with shame and fear, desperate to disassociate themselves from the fallen tyrant. The assets of the Higgins empire were frozen pending investigation. The ranch, once a symbol of oppression, now stood as a monument to its owner's hubris. The public unraveling was complete, a cathartic release for a town long held captive. In the aftermath, as the dust settled, Jedediah Thorne stood not in triumph, but with a quiet, solemn dignity. He turned to Elara, his expression full of admiration and a deep, unspoken affection. She met his gaze, and through her communication device, her voice, though synthesized, conveyed a profound sense of peace and vindication. "Justice, Mr. Thorne," she said, "has a long memory. A new era dawned for Redemption Gulch." Several months later, after the legal maelstrom had subsided and the full extent of Higgins' corruption was laid bare, resulting in lengthy prison sentences for both father and son, the landscape of the town began to transform. Jedediah Thorne, using his considerable family resources, did not simply reclaim what was his or seek retribution. Guided by Elara Vance's sharp intellect and compassionate vision, they embarked on a new venture. They established the Phoenix Foundation, its mission to provide aid, education, and advocacy for those with disabilities and to combat injustice in overlooked rural communities. Elara, from her specially designed office at the heart of the foundation, became its driving force. Her paralysis was no barrier to her leadership. Her mind, sharper than ever, directed initiatives that brought real change. She addressed councils, wrote compelling articles published across territories, and championed the causes of those society had forgotten, her synthesized voice carrying the weight of wisdom and resilience. The former Higgins Ranch was repurposed, transformed into a model enterprise known as Rising Hope Ranch, a place that offered fair wages, ethical practices, and incorporated innovative, accessible designs, allowing individuals of all abilities to contribute and thrive. Jedediah worked alongside Ilara, not as a master, but as a partner, his quiet strength supporting her dynamic leadership, their bond a testament to mutual respect and shared purpose. He had indeed raised her higher, not by lifting her physically above others, but by recognizing her inherent worth, by providing the platform for her brilliance to shine, and in doing so, he had elevated the entire community. The narrator's voice returned, imbued with a sense of profound inspiration, and so, in the heart of Redemption Gulch, where cruelty once cast a long shadow, a new light emerged. They had tried to bury Ilara Vance's spirit, to crush her under the weight of prejudice and misfortune. But they did not understand, she was a seed of indomitable strength. With the unwavering support of a man who saw beyond the visible, who valued the treasure of her mind and heart, Ilara didn't just survive, she blossomed. And in her blooming, she transformed the very ground that had sought to stifle her. Jedediah Thorne, the quiet cowboy, by choosing compassion over contempt, by recognizing true worth where others saw only brokenness, didn't just save a life, he ignited a revolution of dignity. For true power lies not in domination or disdain, but in the courage to uplift, to see the unseen value in every soul, and to build a world where every spirit, regardless of its vessel, can soar to its highest potential. Let this story remind you, never underestimate the quiet ones, for often they carry the greatest storms of change. And never mistake stillness for weakness, for within it can reside the most formidable strength. The highest honor is not to stand above others, but to help them rise. This was the legacy of the cowboy and the bride they thought was broken, a legacy etched not in stone, but in the uplifted hearts of a redeemed community. The image faded on Ilara, at her desk, a gentle smile on her face as she worked, with Jedediah standing by the window, looking out at a land now full of promise, their hands subtly clasped, a symbol of their enduring partnership and the quiet triumph of good over evil.